I'm glad to be with you all. My spiritual journey began with Irish Catholicism, which lasted until I got to Wells, and about halfway through Wells, I left that. For several years, I had no religion. My dear grandmother was a Unitarian Universalist and inspired me to move to that church because it was so accepting. Quite the opposite of my Catholic upbringing. I was blessed in my marriage to Vince, as he was a very open-hearted person, and not only to me, but most of the people in his life. While he did not practice a religion, he was there for everyone. He had a very serious kidney disease, which was diagnosed when he was 19. Fortunately, he had a wonderful doctor in Boston who is head of the kidney department at Tufts Medical Center. He was blessed to live much longer than expected. However, at 62, he was diagnosed with cancer. I don't remember how I got the book, but this book changed our lives. It's called When Things Fall Apart, Hard Advice for Difficult Times, written by a Buddhist nun named Pema Chodron. And here she is. Vince and I both read it and found it deeply moving and helpful. Soon afterwards, we learned that she would be speaking in New York City, and we drove down there to hear her speak. She talked about the need to be open to all feelings, especially the difficult ones, without making them feel bad. Be open to and familiar with everything sacred. Just be with it. It's a link with beings all over the world. We all feel scared. Pema's teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, said that longing to help brings you to create unconditional kindness toward yourself and others. How do you feel now about how polarized we are in these times? Do you see any way we can resolve the barriers? We see it as being on opposite sides, but we have more in common. Loving our children, our families, grief when a dear one is ill or dying, loneliness. There's common ground, and all of us on earth have basic goodness. Can we open to this? Many things that are taught in Buddhism are a challenge to our culture, which teaches us to anticipate, plan, and be in control of what's coming. This aspect of our approach to life keeps our mind in constant motion and encourages us to avoid our feelings, not be with them, and learn from them. How do we become friends with ourselves and our minds and be in the present moment? This is what meditation is about. There are 3 steps. Relax your body. Allow your mind to rest in its own place, letting go of thoughts, happenings, and feelings. And finally, disconnect from self and mind. Simply be open in the present moment. Hold warm, compassionate attention toward whatever you are aware of within yourself as you meditate. Habits, prejudices, self-judgment. Warmth allows these things to move and change rather than us trying to get rid of them. As I age, I find that learning to let go is another way to frame the practice of Buddhism. In the last year or so, I have become aware of memory loss, something I share with more and more friends. I had an assessment about a year ago when I was told that I had mild memory issues. A friend who went with me for the assessment and who's worked with people with dementia her whole life told me that I should consider moving to a senior living community, as being in daily contact and conversation with others helps exercise your brain and slow down memory loss. Given the isolation during the last couple of years due to COVID, I could see that this would likely be helpful. I recently found a place and will be moving there soon. As I prepare to move from my condo in Salem to Riverbend in Ipswich, I'm learning about letting go. This is about accepting that we are not in control and that we can let go of thoughts, feelings, and things, and life will be easier. Things have been such a large part of the last month, and it has amazed me that I have been able to let go of many things that I treasured. Easier to do if you are giving to someone for whom it will be a true gift, but also realizing gradually that they are just things, and that the true value of life is more connected with being able to be open-hearted and caring for the others in your life. For 2,500 years, Buddhism, founded on the principle of nonviolence, has offered a path to inner and outer peace. The ongoing reality of global conflict doesn't render these teachings false or disconnected from our lived reality. Rather, the Buddha's teachings provide insight on the roots of conflict and the possibility of its cessation, as captured in the third noble truth, the truth of the end of suffering. At the heart of the Buddha's teachings is the truth of interdependence, the interconnectivity of all living beings. Our joys and sorrows, happiness and suffering are shared. This means that when we meditate or engage in spiritual practice, we don't just do it for ourselves. Our personal practice is tied to our work in the world and vice versa. Challenges we face. Resting in not knowing what will happen in uncertainty. We are living with challenges every day. COVID-19 has introduced much uncertainty in our world. Before, we could keep the illusion of certainty much more easily. We could make a plan each year. We don't have that now or anything to replace it. We don't know. Yet this is seen as a most fruitful place for awakening the mind. Bardo is the word used to describe it, and that means continual change. Everything is groundless and uncertain. We have to open to this basic reality. Times like this teach us that there is no final resolution. In the most recent edition of When Things Fall Apart, Hard Advice for Difficult Times, there's a brief edition from Pema Chodron, the author and treasured teacher. I am grateful to be alive at this time when we have the incredible fortune of living alongside wise men and women from many traditions who give us these kind of messages over and over again. Look at your mind, be curious, welcome groundlessness, lighten up and relax. Offer chaos a cup of tea. Let go of us and them. Don't turn away. Everything you do and think affects everyone else on the planet. Let the pain of the world touch you and cause your compassion to blossom. Never give up on yourself. I've shared a number of the principles that I find inspiring in Buddhism. I hope you will find these helpful as well as challenging. I feel grateful for all I have learned from the Buddhist tradition. It has encouraged me to learn more and more, to open my heart to others. Challenging, inspiring, and comforting. May we all find a nurturing spiritual path. May we all continue to open and learn. Thank you for asking me to share my story.
Thank you, Quinn. That was so much deep truth there. And it's so interesting to think of COVID as a time when we can, instead of a time that's limiting, a time that could be freeing for us. Thank you very much. And now, Karen Lewis Foley is going to speak with us about, I think, mostly about spiritual direction. Is that correct? Oh, Karen, you're on. Oh, you're muted.
Yes.
There we go.
Do what I do at the beginning of a spiritual direction session. I light a candle. And choke. Thank you so much, Quinn. That was beautiful. My life journey has been full of seeking and wondering, punctuated by major life changes and mystical experiences that have shifted everything. Growing up devotedly Methodist, I loved church, and I found God equally there and in the fields and woods and the pond behind my house. A call to ministry came in my teens, but no, I thought women could not be ministers. Then a 4-year theological struggle. How could a loving God send most of the human race to hell for not being Christian? And how could any God let my friend and classmate die of cancer 10 days before we graduated? Ended with taking leave of Christianity, sophomore year at Wells, and an agnostic young adulthood. But always the universe seemed alive with something I called spirit. I longed for church-like community, but didn't know where to look for it. I found it when my world crashed in divorce, in a Unitarian Universalist church's freedom from creed, support for spiritual exploration, and a couple of members who became my spiritual mentors. It was an intense time. To be very brief, there was a lot of growth and deepening. The call to ministry resurfaced. I fought it, but surrendered, went to Harvard Divinity School, was ordained in 1988, and served UU churches until 2006. And my wonderfully supportive young daughter and son were a big part of my formation. I first heard of spiritual direction in divinity school. It's a form of companionship in which you meet with a spiritual director, now often called companion, to explore where spirit is moving in your life. It is not a mutual sharing. The director listens, asks questions, reflects on what emerges. People sometimes ask how it differs from therapy, and I have found it therapeutic for myself, but resolution of problems is not a goal. The director's focus is on the directee's unfolding path. I've come to visualize it as walking alongside the directee holding a flashlight, so the directee can discern the place where she or he stands and the next step or two ahead. I can't tell them. You could say the flashlight is training, learned skills, and attention to my own spiritual life. In my last year at Harvard, the sudden death of the man I was going to marry occasioned an unwelcome major life shift. Seeking spiritual direction to find meaning in that void, I was assigned to a wonderful Jesuit priest with a twinkly sense of humor, and I have been receiving direction ever since from different directors, except for one hiatus occasioned by a move. In the third congregation I served, a couple of congregates met regularly with me to talk about their spiritual lives, and I realized, oh, they want spiritual direction, and I don't know how to do it, though I tried. At the same time, the congregation's leadership had begun to move in the opposite direction from the one in which they had called me to lead them 8 years ago. I was very discouraged, burning out. That ministry felt unsustainable. So I resigned, took a year off, and then did a part-time pastoral care ministry in a large church and also the Shalem Institute's spiritual direction program. Now, I thought Shalem would give us information and tools and skills. Instead, they immersed us in the messes of our own lives, our prayer, our need for healing. I had to let go of wanting to help, advise, figure out what the directee needed, transmit knowledge, and instead learn to listen, both to the directee and to glimmerings of spirit, and let things unfold. In my case, that meant trust, in which I was woefully short. As in 12-step programs, I had to let go and let something bigger than me lead the way. Practicing spiritual direction, leading retreats and small groups, demolished all desire for solo or lead ministry. An identity shift from my previous career trajectory. It confused me and some who knew me, but it was right. In 2006, I semi-retired with my husband, Dan, and enjoyed 9 years self-employed in spiritual direction, retreats, and pastoral care trainings. This was a natural evolution because I had gone into ministry to be instrumental in the building of people's spiritual lives. And I now continue to offer spiritual direction in full retirement, and I want to do it until I can't do anything. Over the last 40 years, my theology and spiritual practices have evolved. Meditation kept morphing into prayer till I finally stopped distinguishing between them and now just call my daily practice contemplation. Its form moves about depending on what's going on in my life. One of my most transformative meditations, and Quinn will find this familiar because it's like the Buddhist loving kindness meditation. It's to hold in prayer people I find especially difficult. It's transformative. Absolutely necessary are my own monthly spiritual direction, a contemplative circle, and peer supervision. Annual retreats are important, but have been impossible in the pandemic, but I have been tapping into rich online offerings. More and more now, I sit on my back porch and just surrender to the trees, sky, flowering plants, and feeding birds. I stop many times a day when I act from fear or impatience, often, and remind myself to rest in what is. I think partly this is aging. Life is a chance to grow a soul, I have read, and I really do think that we have that chance most abundantly in old age. Theologies often presented a struggle. I never could reconcile a personal God with a cosmic impersonal force. But my mind needed the one and my heart needed the other. Now I'm comfortable with that paradox. And for 20 years, hanging out with practitioners of many beliefs and creeds has softened my theological boundaries. Our different beliefs and spiritual relationships enrich and expand each other, are all gifts to each other. I've learned to appreciate viewpoints very different from mine, and I've grown convinced that everyone has a spiritual life, even if they don't cultivate it, even if their spiritual life is stunted and destructive. It's something in us. Dr. Christine Pachalski of the George Washington Institute for Spirituality and Health says, atheists, religious, humanists, everyone has that spirituality or inner life, the need for a sense of meaning and purpose, end of quote. Now, even with the heightened interest in spirituality of the past couple of decades, right now, the soul-searing uncertainty of our current world, ravaged earth, human violence and oppression, societal division, not to mention ravages of the pandemic, are drawing more people into spiritual direction as a way to find that meaning and purpose. My growing edge right now, I am surprised to find myself curiously revisiting Jesus, whom I never really left behind, but couldn't fit in to where I was for so long. And I'm leading a group at church for people who want to explore this issue in their lives. I have no idea where this goes. Trust again. And finally, I have to say that I am just so deeply grateful for abiding, loving relationships, in particular with Dan, whom I found at the late age of 45, and for people who have appeared in my life when something in me was cracked and broken open, an invitation to engage and learn and grow. Thank you for inviting me to talk about it.
Thank you, Karen. Wonderful to hear about this work in spiritual direction. Our next panelist is Ginny Meeker Munkelwitz, who is going to share with us her explorations of Celtic spirituality.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I hope. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I learned about Celtic Christianity from two Episcopal priests who led a pilgrimage to Ireland, Fred Mosier and Kim Hardy. And I'm going to talk about two questions. First of all, what is Celtic Christianity? And second, how do I celebrate it? This is a picture of the Book of Kells, which is at Trinity College Library in Dublin. When Christianity was first developing around the Mediterranean, the Irish had the Bible, but they were literally at the edge of the known world. So as they read the Bible and interpreted it, they did it in the spirit of their culture, which was rural and nature-based, with the influence of Druids and old Irish beliefs. The easiest way for me to describe Celtic Christianity is that we do not believe in original sin. We believe that man was created in God's image and that our true selves are holy. Sin takes you away from what you were born to be. Here is a quote from a contemporary theologian, J. Philip Newell. But what does it mean to be made in the image of God? In part, it is to say that wisdom is deep within us, deeper than the ignorance of what we have done or become. It is to say that the passion of God for what is just and right is deep within us, deeper than any apathy or participation in wrong that has crippled us. To be made in the image of God is to say that creativity is at the core of our being, deeper than any barrenness that has dominated our lives and relationships. This is Nendrum Monastery in the ancient part of Ireland. There were many large and small monasteries spread throughout the land. Some of them were for men only, some for women only, and some were dual monasteries for men and women. They were places of teaching and worship, and people sent their children to monasteries to be educated. There was no overarching hierarchy at all. This is Skellig Michael. It's an island off the west coast of Ireland, and it was the site of a hermitage. There were many hermits within the old Celtic Christianity. They lived apart in caves. Sometimes they were in communities, but they had their separate cells. And you could live as a hermit for months, for years, or for a lifetime. This is St. Bridget's Well. The Celts believed that the visible and invisible worlds were connected, that there was a separation that was permeable between them. Wells were one of their sacred places because you need water for life, but you have to go to deep, dark places to find it. Another characteristic was constant prayer. To the Celts, prayer was a state of mind, not a formal exercise. They had prayers for herding sheep, making beds, baking bread. And here is a prayer from a collection that was gathered by Etta Gullick. I will kindle my fire this morning in the presence of the holy angels of heaven. God, kindle thou in my heart within a flame of love to my neighbor, to my foe, to my friend, to my kindred all, without malice, without jealousy, without envy, without fear, without terror of anyone under the sun. And they also had someone called an Anam Cara. Anam Cara is Gaelic for soul friend. This is a lifetime friend who loves you and understands you deeply. A teacher, a companion, a spiritual guide. This is a Celtic cross at Monasterboice. Celtic crosses were also spread all throughout Ireland, and they were places to gather and worship. For an illiterate population, the carvings were sermons in stone. They had stories of Christ's life and biblical stories like Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. Celtic Christianity thrived until the Synod of Whitby in 664, when Celtic Christianity and Roman Christianity came up against each other. So what was nice about the Celtic Christianity, the fact that there was a flat organization and that people looked for the truth within themselves, was replaced by a hierarchy and a belief that truth was distributed from above. So the next question is, how do I practice Celtic Christianity? I attend a Presbyterian church, but I'm also a member of the planning committee for several Celtic Christianity events that we hold. This photo is from St. Columba Trail, which I took on a pilgrimage, excuse me. And here's a quote from Pope Benedict XVI. To go on pilgrimage is not simply to visit a place to admire its treasures of nature, art, or history. To go on pilgrimage really means to step out of ourselves in order to encounter God. And we do this with the intent to open ourselves to new beliefs by going to new places, having new spiritual experiences, and as you can see from this, having physically challenging experiences. Another thing we do is we have morning prayer for Advent and Lent. And this consists of prayer, biblical readings, contemplation, and music. Kim was originally trained as a musician before she became a priest. So every morning she brings a new recording, and she was kind enough to make this for us.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Be all else, but not to me, save that thou art. Be thou my best thought in the day and the night, both waking and sleeping, thy presence my light.
Unfortunately, she recorded 5 verses because she thought it sounded more Gaelic, and I don't have time for all of them. Another thing that we do is we have events to celebrate the Celtic calendar, things like services, discussions, movies, and we made this Bridget's cross, which is hanging on my back door. And finally, we do holy hikes. It connects us with nature. This is an Episcopal construction, not a Celtic tradition, but Kim and Fred give it a Celtic twist by giving us these postcards at the end, which have a photo that was taken somewhere on the hike, and then a quote of some sort on the back. So I'm going to end with part of something that was on the back of one of these postcards, and it's part of a poem by John O'Donohue. A journey can become a sacred thing. Make sure before you go to take the time to bless your going forth. to free your heart of ballast, so that the compass of your soul might direct you toward the territories of spirit, where you will discover more of your hidden life and the urgencies that deserve to claim you. May you travel in an awakened way, gathered wisely into your inner ground, that you may not waste the invitations which wait along the way to transform you.
Ginny, thank you. Fascinating. And I think we're probably all inspired to go to Ireland now and see for ourselves. Finally today, Kaffie White McCullough is going to talk about spirituality at the end of life. So Kaffie, you are up now.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen also. Hopefully I am anyway. Yep. Okay. I have to admit I've had more angst about this presentation than I judged that I should. I have felt like the way this title slide reads, that I'm supposed to give great words of wisdom about spirituality and end of life issues, when in reality, what I'm going to do is share my own thoughts about spirituality and how those expanded and grew with my experience around Bob's death, the group I started here at Park Springs, and a book that I was reading when I was asked to be part of this presentation. So just sort of listen, as you listen to me, be aware that what's most important is the process, which is what I think all of us have been saying too. The centrality of process to spiritual growth, that's the crux of what I'm saying. Spiritual process began as a child, and I was raised a Catholic and went to parochial school for 7 years and Mass every week. When I went to Wells, I continued to go to Mass every week, but when the priest ranted and raved about all the students who weren't at Mass, I left angry and decided I wasn't going to go to Mass anymore. But the fear and trepidation that I felt the first week that I didn't go made me so mad at the level of my indoctrination that I never went to Mass again. I've tried other spiritual paths over the years, but would always say that I was very spiritual, but not very religious in the contextual sense. I now believe that we are all divine beings whose human task is to find and nurture that divinity and help it grow. I see life as a process where we gradually at times and abruptly at others grow in spiritual consciousness. I see death as only the transition from the total physical existence to the total spiritual existence. And I'm going to kind of look at these three things: Bob's death, the end of the group that I started, and the book, Jodi Picoult's book, and I love Jodi Picoult. This one is entitled Change of Heart. Bob's death, the details are relatively unimportant, but they were the whole part of the process that was going on. He was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in June of 2016, and we moved to a retirement community in November of 2016. And for many years prior to his cancer diagnosis, he also had a condition that was never able to be diagnosed that resulted in decreasing mobility. So these were superimposed on top of each other, and the mobility issue was what moved him to a long-term care, or the skilled nursing part of Park Springs, in August of 2019. And of course, the pandemic hit in 2020, February, and we were locked down for 77 days and I couldn't see him. And then once we were able to be out of our houses here, I was able to go in, and they permitted me to lock in with him at the nursing facility until he died. I thought I'd be there for 2 to 3 months, and he died 3 weeks later on December 1st, 2020. What did I experience? Imagine the gamut of emotions. I was doing an incredible amount of meditating and just pondering all these things. Bob and I had numerous conversations about end of life. And in fact, by the time he was over in Pebblebrook, the skilled nursing, he was ready to die. but it was going to be about another year before that happened. He'd say things like, I don't want to be here anymore, or I'm ready to go. And just as an aside, if we had lived in a state where medical aid in dying was legal, he would have qualified for medical aid in dying. But the 3 weeks leading up to his death were incredibly rich, and I feel like I was blessed to have been given that time. In fact, the first morning I woke up there with him, I'd slept in the recliner, and he woke up and he said, I was afraid I was going to wake up and find out that it had been a dream that you were here. And he said, how long are you going to stay? And I said, until you decide it's time to go. And I do believe that my being there gave him the peace to be able to leave. So after Bob died, I was struggling with all kinds of things, as you can imagine. But the one that surprised me was that he had been sort of my organizing principle for about 6 or 7 years. I figured out when I needed to go visit him, or how I needed to be home to do something for him, how I had to get him to a doctor's appointment, so on. So all of a sudden I was kind of adrift. I didn't have any purpose anymore and didn't know what I wanted to do to fill that. And in talking with 2 friends here one day at Park Springs, we got talking about medical aid in dying. And I got kind of enthused, and I said, we should advocate for that here in Georgia. And they kind of laughed and said, are you forgetting what state you live in? And I said, yeah, I know, but if you don't start, you never get there. And so we started, and the first meeting was in June of 2021, about 6 months after Bob died. The activities, or what we did, we meet monthly. We've had 35 to 40 people in attendance. The first thing we did was conduct a survey of all the residents here. There were 425. We got over half of them returned, and 75% of them were in favor of a medical aid in dying. We've had different speakers. Once the legislative session began in January, we wrote all of the legislators. We had emailed the ones of appropriate committees like Health and Human Services, and we've been conducting individual Zoom meetings with legislators and senators. And our plan is to try and organize other CCRCs across Georgia to start their own. CCRCs is continuing care retirement communities across Georgia, to start their own groups and begin to get more of a groundswell in Georgia. Well, the particulars of that are not particularly spiritual. They're fairly pragmatic. But again, all of this was happening, and all the discussions we had in the group and hearing different people's stories about their end of life experiences with spouses or parents or loved ones, kind of keep that in present. Those that are against medical aid in dying are against it on their own spiritual beliefs, and that they see that God really is the only one that should make has the determining factor as to when someone's going to leave this earth. The spiritual issues for me revolve around suffering and its purpose, and the role that God or higher being or higher power plays in that. So the book that I was reading, Change of Heart, even the title has a spiritual connotation, because in Wells, in my religion major, I learned of the term metanoia, which means change of heart. So even just kind of the books, I don't know whether Jodi Picoult knows that exists, but it does. The plot is totally immaterial, but woven into the plot is Gnosticism. So what is Gnosticism? At Jesus's crucifixion, there were numerous sects that were all followers of Jesus. And for a few centuries after Jesus's death, these coexisted. And after about the 4th century, a group of bishops got together, and from that came the Nicene Creed, which I could probably repeat in its entirety, even though I haven't been to Mass since Wells, but it's the one that starts, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and blah, 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 blah. And at that time, that was considered what it took to be Christian or whatever. And anything else was considered heretical. And the Gnostic Gospels were so designated as heretical, and they disappeared. But in 1945, they were found in Egypt, and they have been studied and discussed and talked about ever since then. The one thing that really kind of got me and resonated with me was that the early Gnostic Christians saw themselves not so much as believers in God, but seekers of God. And that sort of speaks to what I feel my process has been. So this whole book really challenged me to think about all the issues, added a depth to it, and got me a little bit more back into sort of a more religious bent, if you will, thinking about all that in relation to Catholicism. But Gnosticism fits me far more than Catholicism ever did. So what I want to say is this.
Kaffie, we're not hearing you.
Okay.
Okay, that's better.
Okay.
If you cannot move the papers near your computer, that might help too.
Okay, got it. That we're all spiritual beings having a human experience. We're challenged to increase our consciousness with everything that occurs. It's all a part of the process. Life is that proverbial journey where at birth we are 100% physical and 0% spiritual. And those percentages reverse as life progresses. Death is the point at which we become 0% physical and 100% spiritual or consciousness. And I'm just going to leave you with a quote from the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the Gnostic Gospels. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaffie. I don't know about the rest of you, but I have found this just a really, really rich, powerful session. And I think, Donna, where are you, Donna? I've lost you. There you are. You're muted. Are you going to work through the chat with us?
Yeah, those of you who may or may not have been following along with the chat, as people went on, Barb Hopwood thanking Quinn so much, so inspiring. Can you please list the full title of the book and the author's name, which Quinn does list later on. It's When Things Fall Apart, Hard Advice for Difficult Times by Pema Chodron. Now, the other question that Barb had was, what was the word that means we don't know that you mentioned at the end of your talk? And that word did not appear as far as I can tell. So if you have it, Quinn, maybe you could just type it in the chat. Kathy Wolf, very thought-provoking. Thanks, Quinn. Nancy Catherwood, very interesting. I'm going to get the book. Mary Wilson, to everyone, she had to leave. I'm sorry I have to leave, but this has been spiritually enriching. And I look forward to seeing the recording, which I think Marty has more exciting news about that. I'm struck that the spiritual journeys lead to something greater than ourselves and to greater unity for the entire human family. After Karen presented about spiritual direction, Nancy Catherwood, how do we locate spiritual direction organizations and mentors in our local communities? And Keir, thank you so much, Karen, for sharing your journey, beautifully communicated. And then Karen shares that Spiritual Directors International keeps a directory of spiritual directors, and Contemplative Outreach has a lot of centering prayer groups and probably other similar groups. Also, retreat centers, churches, and synagogues, clergy groups in your community often do offer spiritual direction. And wow, response, Karen Frankel, what strikes me about all the presentations thus far is the sense of peace conveyed, very soothing. And thanks so much, Karen Kilty. Thank you to everyone for presenting and hosting. Sue Milne, I'm grateful for this hour and all of you. Now back to bed. That's what I have for chat. I don't know if anyone has added anything else.
Feel free to unmute yourselves if you have questions, and maybe the best thing, if you've got a question, just put your hand up. You can use the little hand waving thing on the Zoom functions, but they're hard to see. I think it's easier if you just
Real hands work.
wave your hand. So anybody with additional questions or comments?
Jane has an actual hand.
Jane, hi.
I have both. That was lovely to listen to everyone's journey, and how what's interesting is how different it is for each person. And I think it'd be totally fascinating if each one of us would consider thinking through our own journeys, because I know we've all started in different places generally and ended up in totally different places, either close to where we started or far away from the same. And I think it'd be very interesting to have people consider sharing that, whether it's in a chat or in some form of publication.
Maybe we should think about having a conversation like that at reunion.
Yes,
I think it could be really enriching.
I think it'd be very enriching, and I would encourage everybody to take this as a starting place. I mean, I know that my religious belief changed the minute I went to the first class on the New Testament at Wells. And it made me rethink my entire entire point of view about religion.
Yeah.
Radically.
Well, I'll just throw in, I mean, I can't even begin, but, you know, my father was Jewish. My mother was agnostic, really an atheist as long as I can remember. I went to a Catholic high school, and then, you know, I went to Wells, and our older son is a Buddhist director of spiritual life at Amherst College. So I'm really, I'm at a loss, but I agree. I bet there's lots of sort of interesting journeys out there. And my son, when he leads these meditation groups, sometimes I'll go and he always says, "Mom, you're the only one with your eyes open and you're looking all around." And, you know, absolutely no sense of meditating. But anyway, the presentations were great. I really enjoyed listening to your stories, and I'd love to hear more.
I did as well, and I just wanted to mention that there's a something called Shared Crossings that you might all be interested in. Raymond Moody has written books for about 30 or 40 years now on exploring near-death experiences and what they call shared crossings, where you're there when or you're aware of someone passing, and it's just fascinating. It's another level, in fact, beyond what Christianity, for example. Thank you. Sorry.
Karen, it sounds like you, in your own life, you are an entire interfaith experience.
I'm telling you, I have some really good stories. I won't go into them now.
What struck me in listening to these 4 presentations is not only how different they were in some ways, but how there were so many common themes running through them, seeking and being alert, being aware. I have been deeply touched by each one of these. Karen, did you have? Yeah.
I just wanted to say that when you talk about, you know, looking into your own spiritual autobiography, I mean, that's something I've done so many times. I can't even tell you. And honestly, writing this was harder for me than any sermon I've ever written. And they're a lot longer. It was just, well, for all kinds of reasons, but it was hard. But there's, one of the things I did a lot in my ministry was lead spiritual autobiography workshops, I guess you say, would be 6-8 sessions. And they always, you know, the people who took them just wrote these wonderful things about their lives. And, you know, it isn't about writing. It's about what you experience as you explore your life. And there are various tools for kind of drawing out the experiences that I have people go through. And if you're interested in that, there is Dan Wakefield wrote a book. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's been around for since the 80s at least. He's a Unitarian Universalist from Boston, and I think spiritual autobiography is in the title, but I don't know if it is the title. I think if you Google Dan Wakefield and spiritual autobiography, you'd find it. I can do it. I'll try it myself and pass that information along. But he basically lays out the process for doing your spiritual autobiography. It's really great to do it in a group, but you could do your own too.
Yeah. Very good.
Karen, I think the book you may be referring to is Creating from the Spirit. Creating from the Spirit
I don't think that
by
was
Dan Wakefield, subtitled Writing Your Spiritual Autobiography.
Oh, well, okay. You know, maybe it's a newer edition of it. I mean, the one I had was like 30 or 40 years old. So yeah, I'm sure that's it. Yeah.
Do you want to say that title again, Donna?
Yes.
From the Spirit.
Creating from, let me
Creating
find
from
it
the
again.
Spirit.
Creating from the Spirit, Writing Your Spiritual Autobiography. And it's Dan Wakefield, Wakefield.
There's
Great.
also another one called The Story of Your Life. Is that?
That's the one I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's the one I knew.
Oh, yes, Writing a Spiritual Autobiography. And
Yes.
that's out in paperback.
That's the story of your life. That's the one.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Available used for only $1.75.
The bargain.
Nobody does this anymore, you know.
Very good. Other comments or questions for our panelists?
Barbara's got her hand raised.
I'm sorry.
Barb Hopgood Jones.
Barb, yes.
All right, this is not going to be very profound, but I'm just so struck by all of the presentations. This is the fourth one, I believe, that it makes me almost glad to be this old, because we all have so much experience and insight and knowledge, compassion, whatever. And when we were back at Wells, we had youth and energy and imagination and whatever, but I don't really think any of us would trade, maybe some circumstances, but what a tremendously rich group of people we have had the privilege of, knowing. And I'm so grateful to those who organized this. As I say, I haven't really thought of the benefits of being so old very often, but this is one.
Yes.
And yes. And I also have enjoyed reading the biographies prior to the presentations. And in particular, what people took away from Wells, because at least for me, it seems far, far away. And there are very specific things, but reading other people's insights about what that school allowed us to experience, it was very unique, really. And so anyway, thank you all for sharing, and I look forward to all of them in the future. It's just amazing what this little class of people have experienced. And by the way, I have always had difficulty with any form of religion, or even the word spirituality, and the UU Church was as close as we got to this. I know I have these experiences through music, and
You do.
yeah, I definitely do. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you do.
But it's a different kind of thing. But I certainly have experienced the life and the death and the passing of a lot. And anyway, it's very, I'm very glad to hear other people's labeling of it, if you want.
Thank you, Barb. And I think we're all grateful for all of you who have been panelists starting in November with the art program and coming right up through. And you've given me a great segue to announce that there will be another Zoom in April. We are going to be talking about scholarly pursuits, accomplishments. And Marty, do you have the list of names handy?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, I do. And I have the date, April 22nd. And I'm proud to say it's an Anne, Fran, and Nan quartet, namely Anne Vandewater, Nan Hood, Francie Stevenson, and Fran, who we knew as Betty Goldsmith. And they have all are published authors, and they're going to be talking about their scholarly endeavors. And since I have the floor or the screen, I'm happy to follow up. We have succeeded. Betsy has been great and persevered along with Chris Pollock at the college to get the recordings. They are up and ready. They need to be edited just a little bit.
Great.
And we hope to have this one and the other three available to you next week. So